This may no longer be just another diplomatic standoff. Over the past few hours, something unusual has been unfolding around Iran. Military movements are accelerating, strategic aircraft are being repositioned, emergency meetings are taking place behind closed doors in Washington. And most importantly, the language coming from American officials is becoming increasingly alarming. Officially, nobody is calling it a war yet. But unofficially, many analysts believe the world could be only hours away from a major turning point in the Middle East. And when governments suddenly stop speaking calmly, when military assets begin moving quietly at night, when intelligence leaks start appearing almost simultaneously across major media outlets, it usually means one thing: something serious may already be in motion. Right now, the biggest fear inside diplomatic circles is that a direct confrontation between Iran and the United States, or between Iran and Israel, could erupt faster than anyone expected. Because this is no longer just about political tensions. This is about missiles, military alliances, oil routes, regional influence, and global power. If a strike happens, even a limited one, the consequences could spread far beyond the Middle East within hours. Oil prices could surge instantly. Financial markets could panic. Military groups allied with Iran across the region could respond. And suddenly, what started as a targeted operation could spiral into a much wider conflict. That's why the world is watching so closely tonight. Every statement matters. Every military movement matters. Every radar signal, every drone interception, every satellite image is now being analyzed in real time by intelligence agencies across the globe. What makes this moment even more dangerous is the uncertainty. No one truly knows whether this is pressure tactics or the final phase before military action. And history has shown something important. The most dangerous wars are often the ones that begin while leaders are still publicly denying that war is coming. So the question now is no longer whether tensions are rising. The question is, are we witnessing the final hours before a direct confrontation with Iran? What makes this situation so alarming is the speed at which everything is escalating. Just days ago, many experts still believed the crisis could remain under control. But now, the tone has completely changed. Multiple reports suggest that American military assets in the region have been placed on heightened alert. Warships are being repositioned. Surveillance operations have intensified. And behind the scenes, high-level discussions are reportedly taking place about possible response scenarios if the situation continues to deteriorate. At the same time, Iran has adopted a far more aggressive posture. Iranian officials have issued warnings that any attack against their territory or strategic interests would trigger what they describe as a massive response. And that's exactly what worries Western governments. Because unlike smaller regional conflicts, Iran is not isolated. The country has influence across multiple fronts in the Middle East through allied armed groups and regional partnerships. That means a confrontation would not necessarily remain confined to one battlefield. And this is where the danger becomes very real. One drone strike, one missile launch, one miscalculation from either side could trigger a chain reaction that spreads across the entire region within hours. What's also fueling concern is the growing belief that diplomacy may be losing control over the situation. In recent weeks, negotiations and indirect communications appear to have produced very little progress. Publicly, leaders continue to speak about stability and deterrence, but privately, many intelligence analysts believe both sides are already preparing for worst-case scenarios. And when nations begin preparing for the worst, the risk of conflict increases dramatically. Another critical factor is timing. The Middle East is already under enormous pressure. Several ongoing regional crises have pushed tensions to dangerous levels, and many experts fear that the current Iran situation could become the spark that ignites a much larger geopolitical fire. Because this is no longer only about Iran itself, this is about American influence in the region, Israeli security concerns, global energy routes, and the balance of power between major world powers, including Russia and China, who are also watching the situation extremely closely. That's why every new military movement is now being interpreted as a possible signal. Every speech is scrutinized. Every satellite image becomes headline news. And the closer both sides move toward direct confrontation, the harder it becomes to step back without losing credibility or strategic advantage. Which means the world may now be entering the most dangerous phase of this crisis so far. What is truly raising alarm bells right now is not just the tension itself. It's the growing perception that the United States may already be preparing the groundwork for a possible military operation. Historically, before major interventions, Washington often follows a familiar pattern: military repositioning, strong public warnings, emergency diplomatic meetings, and repeated references to protecting American interests or responding to threats. And many analysts believe we are now seeing that exact pattern unfold again. Officially, the United States continues to say that it does not seek a wider war. But at the same time, American officials are making it clear that any attack on U.S. forces, allies, or strategic assets would be met with what they call a decisive response. Those words matter because in geopolitical language, terms like decisive, necessary action, or all options remain on the table are often interpreted as signals that military scenarios are actively being discussed behind closed doors. According to several defense experts, if a strike were to happen, it would most likely begin with highly targeted operations rather than a full-scale invasion. Potential targets could include missile facilities, military command centers, drone infrastructure, or strategic sites believed to be linked to Iran's military capabilities. The objective would likely be to weaken Iran's ability to retaliate quickly while sending a powerful message of deterrence. But here's the problem. Very few people believe Iran would absorb such strikes without responding. And that's exactly why this situation is so dangerous. Iran possesses one of the most significant missile arsenals in the region. It also has the ability to disrupt critical maritime routes, especially around the Strait of Hormuz, one of the world's most important oil transit choke points. If that corridor becomes unstable, global energy markets could react instantly. Oil prices could explode overnight. International shipping could be disrupted, and economies already under pressure could face another major shock. But beyond economics, there's another major concern: regional escalation. Because if Iran responds directly, the conflict could rapidly spread beyond a single confrontation between Tehran and Washington. Armed groups allied with Iran across the Middle East could become involved. U.S. military bases across the region could face threats. Israel's security situation could deteriorate rapidly, and neighboring countries could suddenly find themselves trapped in the middle of a widening conflict. This is why military planners are extremely cautious right now. They understand that modern conflicts rarely stay limited once the first strike happens, especially in a region as unstable and interconnected as the Middle East. And perhaps the most worrying part of all this is that both sides may already believe backing down is no longer politically or strategically possible, which creates the perfect conditions for escalation. Because once governments begin operating under pressure, fear, and public expectations, decisions can start happening very quickly. And history has repeatedly shown that some of the biggest conflicts in the world began exactly like this, with warnings, military positioning, rising tension, and the belief that the other side would eventually step back. Right now, the most dangerous part of this crisis is not what we know, it's what nobody knows. Because behind the official statements, behind the press conferences and diplomatic language, there is an enormous level of uncertainty surrounding what could happen next. And in international conflicts, uncertainty is often what creates the greatest danger. At this stage, every country involved is trying to calculate the intentions of the others. The United States is watching Iran. Iran is watching Washington and Israel. Russia and China are monitoring every development carefully. Gulf countries are reinforcing their security measures. And intelligence agencies across the world are analyzing military activity almost minute by minute. The entire region is now operating under extreme tension, and history has shown that when multiple powers enter a crisis environment like this, even a small mistake can trigger consequences nobody originally intended. One radar misinterpretation, one unauthorized strike, one drone entering the wrong airspace, one commander reacting too quickly under pressure. That's sometimes all it takes for a regional standoff to become an international crisis. And what makes this moment even more fragile is the fact that the Middle East is already overloaded with instability. Several ongoing conflicts have already pushed the region to the edge. Trust between major actors is extremely low. Military forces are positioned closer to each other than usual, and political leaders are under enormous pressure to appear strong in front of both allies and domestic audiences. That creates a dangerous psychological environment, because when leaders fear looking weak, the chances of escalation increase dramatically. No government wants to appear vulnerable, no military wants to look unprepared, and no major power wants to lose strategic influence in one of the most important regions on Earth. At the same time, global markets are reacting nervously to every new headline. Investors know that a direct confrontation involving Iran could immediately affect oil supplies, shipping routes, inflation, and financial stability worldwide. This is not just a regional issue anymore. This is a global pressure point. And that's why every speech from Washington, Tehran, or Tel Aviv is now dissected by analysts within minutes. Every military aircraft movement is tracked online. Every satellite image becomes the subject of speculation. The entire world is essentially watching a geopolitical pressure cooker heat up in real time. But perhaps the most frightening reality is this. Even if neither side truly wants a full-scale war, crises like these can sometimes evolve beyond anyone's control. Because once military forces are deployed, once retaliation cycles begin, and once national pride becomes involved, de-escalation becomes far more difficult. And tonight, many experts fear the world could be closer to that point than most people realize. The question now is no longer whether the situation is serious. The question is whether diplomacy still has enough time left to stop what may already be unfolding behind the scenes. What we are witnessing right now may become one of the defining geopolitical moments of this decade. Because even though no official declaration of war has been made, the atmosphere surrounding this crisis feels very different from previous tensions. The signals coming from the region are becoming harder to ignore. Military assets are moving. Governments are increasing their alerts. Diplomatic language is becoming more aggressive. And behind closed doors, world leaders are likely preparing for scenarios they hope will never happen. That alone tells you how serious the situation has become. What happens next could depend on only a few critical decisions made in the coming hours or days. A single strike, a single retaliation, a single political miscalculation. And suddenly, the world could wake up to an entirely new reality. Because if direct conflict erupts involving Iran, the consequences would almost certainly go far beyond the battlefield itself. Global oil markets could face immediate shockwaves. International trade routes could become unstable. Regional allies could be pulled into the conflict, and major world powers would be forced to respond politically, economically, and possibly militarily. That's why so many governments are desperately trying to avoid crossing the point of no return. But the problem with high-tension crises like this is that events can start moving faster than diplomacy itself. Once military operations begin, leaders often lose the luxury of patience. Public pressure increases, national pride becomes involved, retaliation becomes expected. And every response creates pressure for an even stronger response after that. This is how escalation spirals begin. Not always because leaders planned a massive war from the beginning, but because each side believes it cannot afford to appear weak once the confrontation starts. And that may be the biggest fear surrounding Iran tonight. Not necessarily that war is guaranteed, but that the current trajectory is becoming increasingly difficult to reverse. For now, the world is still waiting for the next statement, waiting for the next military movement, waiting for confirmation that diplomacy still has a path forward. But if those efforts fail, the next few hours could become the moment historians look back on and say, that was the moment everything changed.